From Pacifica, it's Media History 101, the history of late night television. With special guest Rudy Evenhouse. Now, here's your host, Adrienne Kalonovic.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Kalonovic, and I'll be your host today for the PCT Media History Podcast. On today's episode, we're talking about the history of late night television. Our special guest is Rudy Evenhouse, an expert on late night television.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rudy
Hi,
Evenhouse.
Rudy.
I've been a fan of late night television ever since I watched The Daily Show with Jon Stewart with my dad. And I'm an aspiring late night talk show host, so I'm going to be answering some questions about the history of late night television.
All right, so let's get started. So first of all, what's your favorite late night show of all time?
Well, my favorite late night talk show of all time is obviously The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. It ran from 1962 to 1992 and it really pioneered the art of late night talk show hosting, shall I say. So this is actually a picture of Johnny Carson with his sidekick, Ed McMahon. And Ed McMahon was Johnny Carson's sidekick and announcer for his entire 30-year run. And he had a band leader called, which was actually for the first part of the show, it was Skitch Henderson who was the band leader for previous Tonight Show hosts. And he eventually got Doc Severinsen. And yeah, that was his band leader. And he hosted the Tonight Show for a very long time. And he very much pioneered it. Here, actually, this is an interesting story because this is Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers. Now, this is what we would call a juicy public feud, because basically, Joan Rivers was the guest host for the Tonight Show for a number of years. When she found out she wasn't going to be considered to replace Johnny Carson when he retired, she went and signed with the Fox network to host a late night talk show. This really pissed Johnny Carson off. He took her off the show and never spoke to her again. And not only that, when Jay Leno took over the Tonight Show in 1992, he banned Joan Rivers from the show. And personally, I think this was like a very, very great injustice, actually. And it really shows that Johnny Carson, while being a great late night talk show host, was not always a perfect person.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, I would imagine that Joan Rivers would feud with someone on a show, given her attitude that she always so effortlessly put on when she was on her shows. So it makes sense for her, but I didn't know that. So let's get started with how talk shows came to be. You know, the beginning of how it all started.
Okay, yeah. So actually, the very first person to host a late night talk show was Faye Emerson. She hosted the Faye Emerson show, and she began hosting it in 1949, and she ended her run in 1952. Now, she did like a 15-minute show, and it was like, in 1949, it was playing on CBS, and it actually went nationwide in 1950. And so she was the first person to host a late night talk show. Even though she didn't host it for a very long time, she really pioneered it. And unfortunately for her, after her show, it really got taken over by basically exclusively guys when the show format actually became profitable. So that's another one of injustices of late night television. But I actually watched a clip of her show when I was preparing for this, and it's pretty funny. I like it.
All right, so she was the first talk show host, and did she do radio hosting before that? Because I know that was like really what people started to get into the whole listening to hosts.
Well, I actually don't know that, but it very well could have been. A lot of people transitioned from radio to television, and so it very well could have been, but I do not know at this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do know that Ed Sullivan is like a huge part of late night talk shows. So can you tell me a little bit about him?
So yeah, Ed Sullivan started hosting the Ed Sullivan Show in 1948, and it ran until 1971. Basically, it was a musical variety show. He didn't really do like his own like stuff. He would basically announce other acts. And actually, this is where the Beatles got their start, because they performed on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, and it really jump-started their career in the eyes of the general public. And I can actually go into some of the songs they performed. So yeah, they had a very successful run as the Beatles after they performed on the Ed Sullivan Show. And the songs they performed on the Ed Sullivan Show were All My Loving, Tell There Was You, and She Loves You. And it really jump-started their career. It actually, I guess it would probably have been said that it helped Ed Sullivan, but it was really the Beatles, which is, it really helped their career the most.
Yeah, I bet. It was a super huge moment. Like, I don't know that much about late night, obviously not as much as you. And I definitely know about that moment, and I know that it was kind of the true beginning of the Beatles' world domination.
Yeah, and that's true. And it also speaks to a lot of there. For a while, there was like a bunch of British artists would come to the United States and become popular there. So you have stuff like the Beatles, Elton John, Queen, and it really shows that British music and artists were very popular and could have a worldwide audience.
Right, definitely. Do you know how many years the Ed Sullivan Show ran for?
So I believe it ran for 23 years. It ran from 1948 to 1971.
Right. And then after Ed Sullivan, there was like kind of an influx of more Tonight shows like Johnny Carson. And so could you tell me some stuff you know about Johnny Carson?
Yeah, I can actually, and it's important when talking about the history of the history of the Tonight Show, to look at all the hosts that hosted. So basically, Steve Allen started hosting the Tonight Show in 1954, and he hosted till 1957. Now, the guy that got next was Jack Parr, and he hosted from 1957 to 1962. Now, it's important to remember, back then, the format was very, very long. The original Tonight shows with Steve Allen and Jack Parr ran for 115 minutes, basically ran from like 11:15 to 1 a.m. And that's why they got like a new host every few years, because they would get burnt out. It was a 5-night a week, 115 minutes a day show, and they would get burnt out and leave. And there is actually another interesting story regarding the Jack Parr era of the Tonight Show, where you have to remember television censorship was a lot more strict back then. And things that we would think are not so bad now were heavily censored in television. And so one night, Jack Parr, he told a joke that was a little bit risque. We wouldn't consider it that bad today. Back then, it was a little risque. So he told the joke, and NBC cut it. And Jack Parr was really bad about that. So then what he did, I believe it was the next show, partway through the program, he walked off the set. And they had to complete the show without him. And he stayed off the air for weeks. It was a huge scandal. And he said before he walked off, I bet there's a better way of making a living than hosting a late night talk show. And eventually NBC got him to come back. And when he came back, he said, I checked and there wasn't. So, yeah, that was basically, that was a really, honestly, I think it's an epic moment in late night television, really sticking it to the corporate network. I really like Jack Parr for that. But Jack Parr eventually left the Tonight Show, despite him being very popular, just because the 115-minute a day for 5 days a week really wore him down and burned him out. So then they got Johnny Carson to come in. So basically, Johnny Carson was at first didn't think he could fill Jack Parr's shoes. We think of Johnny Carson today as a legend, a giant among late night talk show hosts. But in actuality, back then, Jack Parr was the legend. And Johnny Carson was just this up-and-coming talk show host. He actually was a bit like nervous and jittery on the air. He wasn't sure if he could sit behind a desk and do interviews. And another thing about Johnny Carson we don't often realize, he was actually he was what we would call fairly an introvert. He didn't really like being in social situations. So you think, oh my God, all these late night talk show hosts, they're so great. I could never relate to them. Johnny Carson, he was kind of an introvert. He didn't like, he liked doing interviews because basically that was a controlled situation. But if he was at a party, he would do terribly. But he had a very good knack at comic timing and interview skills. And he got the Tonight Show. I mean, between Jack Parr's departure and Johnny Carson's coming to the Tonight Show, there were some guest hosts. But then Johnny Carson came to the Tonight Show in 1962, and he hosted it for almost 30 years, about 29 years and 7 months. He hosted it with Ed McMahon and Doc Severinsen. Of course, Skitch Henderson was the band leader for the first few years. I'm just curious, what is your view of Johnny Carson?
Well, I don't have that many that much knowledge on Johnny Carson specifically. I do know that there was a lot of people that were famous that, again, like with Ed Sullivan, became more famous from it. And I do know that that's kind of when the more like comedians becoming talk shows started to arise versus people who were sort of like radio personalities or like good presenters. Now comedians with people who had like comedic timing were starting to come in and really steal the show with their comedy in late night.
Yeah, that's true. And as a matter of fact, we have up here a picture of Jay Leno. Jay Leno was a stand-up comic, and he was named Johnny Carson's permanent guest host for several years before Johnny Carson retired. And he actually, here's the thing about Jay Leno, we got other juicy facts here. He had this manager, actually, who is, shall we say, not the nicest person. She was a shrewd manager. And there's a story of how Jay Leno's manager basically got in the Tonight Show after Johnny Carson retired, because Johnny Carson actually favored David Letterman. So David Letterman hosted Late Night with David Letterman, which ran in the hour after Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. It should be important to know that Johnny Carson eventually bargained the network to make the Tonight Show shorter, going from 1 hour, 115 minutes to 60 minutes. 115 minutes to 90 minutes, and then to 60 minutes. And he also managed to get his work week reduced to just three 60-minute shows a week. So they would have for the rest of the for the other 2 days they would do reruns, and then one day there would be a guest host. Jay Leno was one of the guest hosts, and we also talked about Joan Rivers, but David Letterman actually got the time slot after Johnny Carson, and he hosted a show there from 1982 to 1993 called Late Night with David Letterman. And so David Letterman wanted David Letterman wanted David Letterman to host the Tonight Show after he retired, and everyone thought the network would go with David Letterman. But in a surprise move, they actually went with Jay Leno. And there are several reasons for this. If you want to know the easy reason, the simple reason, it's that David Letterman hated the network. He made fun of the network, he mocked the network, and Jay Leno would suck up to the network and do whatever they wanted. And so they figured, hey, if we've got two people who are both pretty good comedians, but one who's very abrasive to the network and one who will just do whatever the network wants, we're just going to go with that guy. And also, Jay Leno's manager managed to get a secret deal. Whereas Leno would stay with NBC, and then Jay Leno would be guaranteed the Tonight Show when Johnny Carson retired. And what we're bringing up right now is a picture of Jay Leno interviewing Conan. You see, after David Letterman, shall we say, got pissed that he was not given the Tonight Show, he left NBC and moved to CBS, where he hosted a show called The Late Show with David Letterman from 1993 to 2015. And so they needed to find another person to fill the spot vacated by David Letterman. And so they got Conan O'Brien, who wrote for The Simpsons, and I believe he did some work with Saturday Night Live too. But then, so it was Leno at 11:30. What's the name? I'm forgetting now. It was Conan O'Brien at 12:30. And then what eventually happened was Conan O'Brien got a deal where he would stay at NBC if he was giving the Tonight Show in 5 years. And the problem with this was that Leno's Tonight Show was still very popular. So when Leno went off the air and Conan O'Brien came in, I sort of think that maybe because Conan O'Brien was airing shows at a later time, and I'm not sure if audience really resonated with him at the earlier time slot, because you remember 11:30 and 12:30 are two different time slots. And if people who are going to watch a show at 11:30 or even 10:30 in some places are not the same people who are going to be staying up later and watching the 12:30. So what ended up happening was that Conan O'Brien only hosted The Tonight Show for 7 months. And basically the network gave Leno a primetime show, which aired right before Conan O'Brien's Tonight Show. And so this was a really bad lead-in, right? So this ended up hurting Conan's Tonight Show further. And what the NBC wanted to do was they wanted to push, they wanted to air a shortened, truncated 30-minute version of the primetime Leno show at 11:30 and push the Tonight Show like to 12 a.m. with Conan O'Brien. But Conan O'Brien said, nope, I'm not doing that. That would hurt the integrity of the show. So eventually Conan O'Brien left the show and went to TBS, a cable network, and Leno regained control of the Tonight Show and hosted it from 2010 to 2014.
Wow, well, that's one big chunk of late night history right there. Possibly the most important one, because I remember Jay Leno being a big deal, and there were also quite a few like scandalous things that started happening on late night around that time too. As it went into the 80s and the 90s, there would be some people that would go on there and purposely act a fool, or maybe not. And I remember there being some things, I think it was Drew Barrymore on Jay Leno, I could be wrong, that she got on stage or something. But yeah, lots of history going on with Jay Leno. So who's your favorite Tonight Show host, would you say?
Well, my favorite Tonight Show host is Johnny Carson. I think Jack Parr and Steve Allen were good too, but I really don't watch a ton of that. I've watched some of that, but not the whole time. I don't really like Jay Leno. I feel like the Tonight Show should have gone to David Letterman. I think Conan O'Brien was a good host, and he had a really cool set. Unfortunately, he didn't get that long to prove his worth. Jimmy Fallon, I mean, I just don't like his style of hosting the Tonight Show. I mean, I will say this. Jimmy Fallon has a really cool set. I mean, I don't really have a picture of it, but, you know, he has the blue curtain. He has the desk. I think late night talk shows as a whole have gone away from using curtains. You have Colbert with the door that opens, and I think Johnny Carson really pioneered curtains in the sets of late night talk shows, and it used to be far more common. And he had this really famous rainbow colored curtain, right? And let's see. James Corden actually had a purple curtain that was really cool for a while, but even he got rid of that. So Jimmy Fallon is the only person who really has curtains in late night talk shows anymore. And I'm really glad of that, because I really like curtains. And I think it's a really underrepresented set piece in late night talk shows in the modern era.
I think, doesn't Stephen Colbert also have a curtain that the guests walk out of before they go on the stage?
He might, but it's not like you can't really see it in the show very often.
Yeah, it's not really in the frame. But I do think that they walk out of the curtain and they shake his hand and they go sit down. That's one that I recall.
That's possible.
Yeah,
but it's not really. They themselves don't walk out of the curtain.
Right. Yeah, they're already there giving their monologue. So speaking of modern talk show hosts, the Tonight Show now is with Jimmy Fallon, and we have the three main biggest talk show hosts: Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, and Steve Colbert. So who would you like to start talking about first?
Well, let's see. I'll talk about Stephen Colbert, actually, because I love Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert is basically my idol. There's a funny story. I started a late night talk show in 2016, and it was basically based on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. But back then I was watching the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and the show that aired right after it, which was the Colbert Report. And so when I was coming up with the title for my show, I drew inspiration from my two shows I liked, the Daily Show and the Colbert Report. So I came up with the Daily Report. And after Colbert got his late night show, I really sort of modeled the structure more after his show. And I really think Colbert is a very good comedian, and he is my favorite current late night talk show host. And so Colbert is a very interesting story because he is actually not necessarily a natural host. He is an actor. I believe he was part of like Second City comedy troupes, and he got a job on The Daily Show with Craig Kilborn. That's another thing. The Daily Show on Comedy Central, which is a cable channel, was a very popular show and continues to be. And the first host, we all remember The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. The first host was actually Craig Kilborn. The Daily Show is basically a satirical news show. They have correspondents, but it's actually less of a news show, more of a spoof on news shows, and a comedy show that's parodying a news show. And so Stephen Colbert joined as a correspondent, and basically the correspondents would go and interview people and make comedy pieces. And so I think one of the funniest, I'm not sure if this was during the Craig Kilborn era or the Jon Stewart era, was Stephen Colbert and Steve Carell got together and did this sketch where they got Steve Carell really, really drunk, and basically hilarity ensued. You gotta check it out if you haven't seen it. But Colbert then in 2005, I believe, got his own spin-off airing after The Daily Show with Jon Stewart on Comedy Central called The Colbert Report. And basically, Colbert played the character of a conservative talk show pundit. And he played this for a very long time. In fact, I believe he ended his run in 2014 when he was named to succeed David Letterman as the host of The Late Show. And he actually considered not taking it, or he was considering whether he should take it or not, because it would be the first time, and because of all his years on The Daily Show and on The Colbert Report, he was playing a character. He wasn't being a host. So he had a rough start as the host of The Late Show because he just didn't know how to be himself on screen because he was dropping the character persona, and his ratings suffered greatly, or at least some to a certain extent. He got strong ratings the first night, but then he trailed very far in the ratings of the previous nights. And so he had to sort of find his groove. And one thing he did is he got a showrunner, which helped him run the show so he could just focus on the comedy. And then what happened was Donald Trump declared his candidacy for president. And that happened actually before the show ran. But once Stephen Colbert got more political and started making more political jokes, he really found a audience with people who, shall we say, didn't like Trump. So he is most known for his very viciously biting attacks of Trump and jokes where he constantly mocked the president. One of the things he did was a Trump impression, which is very, very good. But actually, after Donald Trump refused to accept the results of the election, he actually changed course, and he now will refuse to say Trump's name or do an impression of him. But he still talks about him on the show. So yeah, that's and on to the other talk show hosts. Jimmy Kimmel actually got the show in 2002. He got the show because he was playing this doing the show before called The Man Show. It's a fairly controversial show because it basically was a show that was basically it was basically using sort of pretty sexist tropes to make parodies on it, on stuff like that. Check it out. You could check it out if you want to see what that's about. But personally, I don't think that's one of Jimmy Kimmel's best shows. It's probably not really, probably offensive by today's standards. But he did end up getting Jimmy Kimmel Live, which aired on what's it called? It aired on ABC from in 2003 actually, and it used to air after Nightline at 12 or 12:30, but they eventually moved it before Nightline to compete with the other late night talk shows. And Jimmy Fallon, well, he got the show in the Tonight Show in 2014, and he what he actually did is they moved the show from Burbank in California to New York to take advantage of a tax credit they could get, and also so Jimmy Fallon could continue in New York, because Jimmy Fallon was the host of Late Night after Conan O'Brien left for TBS. So anyway, he has hosted the show since. But one of his first jokes upon coming to the show, because there had been so much turnover with Jay Leno kept taking it over, that I'm your host for now. So that's basically my take on the 3 late night talk show hosts. And I'd be curious what your opinions on them were.
Yeah, well, I never really got into like watching it weekly, like the ritual of it. But I did like Jimmy Fallon in the beginning. I thought that he was like very like fresh and exciting and fun, whereas the other talk show hosts were more like mellow and stern and sarcastic. And then as the years went on, I felt that Jimmy Fallon started to feel forced, and more on, it started to feel more and more forced. And now there's kind of like this ongoing joke that his laughs are just like so forced, it's like unbelievable. But I think that, you know, he does a great job with the show. And I think that he does a great job with making it family friendly, whereas like not all late night shows are. I mean, obviously they're late night, and late nights, you know, known to be with more adult content. And so I think that that's a great way to have it become a more universal thing, have more content from people of a like very young audience, have their famous actors and singers on the show as well.
That's true, and I think that makes a good point. Regardless of what I think about Jimmy Fallon, it is very good to have a late night talk show that people of any ages can enjoy. And yeah, I mean, that's I think probably a good thing, because otherwise maybe people won't be able to watch late night talk shows at like a young age because they're too inappropriate. So having a family friendly one can be good. I personally like humor that's more adult, but I think there can be both.
Yeah, I agree too. I think that James Corden is another one that has more kind of like a younger crowd. So, I don't watch him too much, but a lot of the YouTube stuff goes viral too, which is another thing I saw with talk show hosts. So they're really getting more of a universal audience in that regard.
Right. So I wish we could talk more, but it looks like we're out of time. So do you want to close off the show?
Yes, I can. So thank you so much, Rudy. I've learned so much about the history of late night television with you. And thank you for listening to Media History Podcast with this episode. And so, is there any last words that you have, Rudy?
That's all, folks. Good night.
All right,
I'll
thanks,
talk for a few more seconds because we're not off yet.
All right, well, my last words are, Jimmy Fallon, try less. And that's all.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks so much, Rudy.
Good night.